Julia Thompson stared blankly at the growing number of coffee cups littering the narrow table inside the conference room of the New Orleans Police Department. Each cup was a quiet marker of another sleepless hour, each one a silent scream of desperation. The harsh fluorescent lights overhead buzzed like distant static, casting elongated shadows that exaggerated the hollows under her eyes. 51 hours. Her son, Liam, had been missing for over 51 hours now, and time had stopped making any sense. Her husband, Thomas, sat beside her, his posture slouched as if gravity itself was too much to bear. He normally dressed with crisp precision, a sharp dresser even on weekends. But now his shirt was rumpled, sleeves rolled, tie loosened, and a dark stubble coated his jaw like a physical manifestation of helplessness. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," came a voice from the door. Detective Rivera, late 30s, her dark hair pulled back into a functional ponytail, stepped inside with a manila folder thick with updates. Her voice was firm, professional, but the fatigue was unmistakable. "I know this is unimaginably hard, but I want to bring you up to speed." Julia straightened in her chair, hands clenched. Any news, even the smallest piece, could mean hope. Her son was 11. 11. He needed routine. He needed his medications. He needed her. "Liam is special," she whispered, her voice raw. "He doesn't do well with change." And he insisted on wearing that ridiculous neon green hoodie that morning. "It has a giant dinosaur on it." That's what he was wearing when I saw him last. "We've mobilized every available unit," Rivera continued, her eyes scanning her notes. 3 counties are involved. We've done helicopter sweeps, drone surveillance, and foot patrols. No leads. Not a single sign of the bus. Not a single call. No ransom. It's as if the whole class just vanished. Thomas's voice cracked. "An entire school bus of disabled kids doesn't just disappear, Detective. They had chaperones, teachers, a driver with 20 years of experience. Someone should have seen something." 12 people, Rivera echoed. 10 kids from New Horizons Academy, a private special education school. 2 teachers, Ms. Hall and Ms. Ramirez. All missing. The only adult not on that bus was Mr. Grant, the 3rd teacher. Julia looked up sharply. He should have gone. He's stronger than the others. He could have protected them. Rivera's tone remained calm. He stayed behind at the visitor center due to seating limitations. The bus was operated by a seasoned driver, Charles Menard, a park veteran with a clean record. They left the main visitor center of Jean Lafitte National Historical Park at precisely 9:30 a.m. on Thursday morning. It was a 3-hour scheduled tour of the accessible boardwalk trails. When they didn't return by 1 p.m., staff began radioing the driver. After no response for half an hour, rangers were sent out. "And found nothing," Thomas muttered, scrubbing his face with his palms. "Not a damn trace." Rivera nodded grimly. No tire tracks. No debris. No signs of an accident. It's like the vehicle ceased to exist. Julia's gaze drifted toward the whiteboard in the room. The photos of the missing children stared back at her, smiling, hopeful, unaware. She lingered on Liam's face. That crooked smile, the oversized glasses constantly slipping down his nose, the unruly hair that no amount of gel could tame. "If this was a ransom plot," Julia asked, "why no demands? No calls?" "That's what's so strange," Rivera admitted. "Statistically, kidnappers make contact within 24 hours. That window's passed. We're not dealing with a typical case here. There's something else going on." "Mr. Grant?" Thomas asked. "Any leads there?" Rivera shook her head. "He's been questioned extensively. Security footage confirms he never left the visitor center. Multiple eyewitnesses saw him panic when the bus didn't return. He was pacing, calling both teachers nonstop. He's been Liam's favorite, Julia murmured. Said he made reading fun. The thought he could be behind this, her voice trailed off. We recovered the bus late last night, Rivera said suddenly. The words hit like a jolt. Where? Julia whispered, her entire body tensing. 7 miles off the main route, hidden behind dense mangroves, partially covered with tarp and vegetation. No visible damage, no blood, no signs of a struggle. It looked staged. That makes no sense, Thomas said. Those kids, some of them are nonverbal. Some use wheelchairs. How could they just vanish? Which is why, Rivera said slowly, we believe this was premeditated. This wasn't random. Multiple people were likely involved. And we're investigating all possibilities. The driver? Julia asked. He's a suspect. Rivera exhaled. We're digging into Charles Menard's background. He's been with the Park Service 12 years, spotless record. But at this point, we have to consider every angle. Either he was forced or he's complicit. Thomas leaned forward. Is this personal? One of the kids targeted and the rest collateral? It's possible, Rivera nodded. We've reviewed every student's file, interviewed every parent. So far, no clear pattern. But one thing stands out, this school isn't cheap. Tuition averages $45,000 a year. Every family here is financially well off. So money is the motive? Julia asked. Maybe, Rivera said. But without a demand, it's only a theory. What we know is this. Someone went through a lot of trouble to make those children disappear. And we intend to find out who. Outside, dawn was beginning to stain the sky with a faint pink glow. Julia didn't move. Her son, her only child, was somewhere out there. Possibly alone. Possibly frightened. She would not let herself think he was gone. She couldn't. The door burst open without warning, causing Julia to jolt upright from her hunched position in the conference room. A uniformed officer stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as if he had sprinted through the entire station. Detective Rivera, he said urgently, his voice breathless and loud enough to draw attention from nearby officers. We've got something. Julia's heartbeat kicked into overdrive. She clutched the armrest of her chair as Detective Rivera stood instantly, all composure replaced by sharp alertness. What is it? The officer hesitated for a second, his eyes flicking toward Julia before returning to the detective. A park ranger conducting a sector sweep just reported finding multiple wheelchairs dumped in a remote swamp sector of the park. Julia's vision narrowed, her ears ringing. Wheelchairs, she repeated, her voice thin, barely audible. Her mouth had gone completely dry. The officer nodded grimly. And bodies, ma'am. 2 of them. The words knocked the air out of Julia's lungs. The room tilted slightly, and she felt Thomas's arm slide quickly around her back to steady her. Are they? She couldn't finish the question. Rivera was already moving, grabbing her radio and jacket. We don't have IDs yet, she said with practiced urgency. We're treating this as an active scene. I'm going now. We're coming with you, Thomas said firmly, already helping Julia to her feet. Rivera shook her head. It's a crime scene. You can't compromise it. I can't allow. That's our son out there. Julia cut her off, her voice sharp with desperation. Either we come with you, or we follow you anyway. Rivera locked eyes with her for a tense beat, then gave a tight nod. You can follow, but you stay back once we arrive. I mean it. The next hour blurred into a surreal caravan of police vehicles navigating through pre-dawn darkness. Their sirens stayed silent, but their flashing lights painted the trees in hues of blue and red. Julia and Thomas followed in their SUV, the silence between them heavier than any words. Julia's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles were white. It might not be Liam, Thomas said finally, his voice hoarse, cracking slightly. We can't assume the worst." Julia nodded automatically, but her mind was already racing through every possibility. Liam didn't use a wheelchair full-time like some of his classmates, but he sometimes needed one on longer excursions when his balance issues made walking difficult. If they found a wheelchair that looked like his, she shook the thought away. The caravan turned off the main road onto an unmarked dirt trail, the terrain becoming bumpier, less traveled. Eventually, the vehicles could go no further, and everyone continued on foot. Thomas supported Julia as they trudged through mud and thick vegetation. Branches slapped against their arms, the ground squelched underfoot, and the air was thick with humidity and the smell of stagnant water. As they emerged into a clearing, the scene unfolded like something out of a nightmare. Police vehicles with emergency lights cast rotating patterns across the wet ground. Forensic techs in white suits moved slowly and carefully, placing numbered evidence markers. Yellow crime scene tape flapped lightly in the wind. And there, partially submerged in the murky water, were wheelchairs, 7 of them. Julia gasped audibly. Their colors stood out painfully against the muted tones of the swamp: pink, blue, green, purple, each one familiar. Several were damaged, twisted wheels, snapped footrests. "No, no, no," she whispered. Rivera intercepted them before they could move closer. "This is as far as you go," she said with firm authority, placing a hand on Thomas's arm. Julia peered past her, searching frantically. "The bodies. They've been recovered," Rivera said. "Our medical examiner is preparing them for transport. We haven't confirmed ID yet." Julia's gaze followed the movement of 2 stretchers being carried through the mud. Both were enclosed in black body bags. One was smaller than the other. A disturbance at the edge of the perimeter drew everyone's attention. Another couple had arrived, pushing past officers, David and Elizabeth Sanchez. Julia recognized them immediately. Their daughter Mia was Liam's friend, one of the younger kids in the class. "That's Mia's backpack," Elizabeth screamed, pointing at a purple backpack with butterfly patches lying near a tarp of collected evidence. "That's my daughter's backpack." David dropped to his knees in the mud, a guttural cry escaping his throat as Elizabeth had to be restrained from crossing into the taped-off zone. Rivera moved quickly to intercept them, guiding the grieving couple to a more private spot away from the main activity. When she returned, her face was solemn. "We've made a preliminary identification," she told the Thompsons quietly. "One of the victims appears to be Mia Sanchez, based on physical characteristics and personal effects. The other is Ms. Hall." A cocktail of emotion surged through Julia. An overwhelming sadness for the Sanchez family and a terrible, aching relief that Liam wasn't one of the bodies. That relief, however, came with a powerful wave of guilt. Rivera lowered her voice. "Both victims show signs of execution-style gunshots to the head. This was deliberate, not exposure, not accidental." Thomas pulled Julia closer as she began to sway slightly. "The wheelchairs," Rivera continued, "appear intentionally destroyed, which suggests the attackers no longer needed them, after choosing which victims to keep." The implication landed like a hammer. Some of the children, possibly including Liam, were still alive. Julia's eyes remained fixed on the wheelchairs. "They're arranged," she said suddenly, "not scattered. Look, it's almost like a semicircle." Rivera turned to look, following Julia's gaze. "You're right," she said slowly. "This wasn't careless. This scene was staged. It's a message, or a distraction." A man in a medical examiner's jacket approached with a clipboard. "Preliminary time of death," he reported, "is about 10 to 12 hours ago. They were alive at least a full day after the abduction." Julia's breath hitched. That meant the others could still be alive. "We need to search more," she said, the urgency returning to her voice. If they kill 2 here, the others could be nearby. We're already widening the grid, Rivera assured her. Drones, boats, dogs, everything we've got. At first light, air support with thermal imaging will scan the wetlands. Thomas held Julia tightly, his eyes locked on the swamp beyond. The first fingers of dawn were stretching across the horizon, casting ghostly light across the water where the wheelchairs stood like silent witnesses. He's still alive, Julia whispered. I would know if he wasn't. I'd feel it. By mid-morning, the clearing in the swamp had transformed from a somber discovery site into a hub of frenetic activity. News helicopters hovered overhead like vultures, their rhythmic blades a constant reminder of the tragedy that was quickly becoming national news. Down at the main entrance to Jean Lafitte National Historical Park, a fleet of media vans with satellite dishes jutted skyward, crowding the visitor parking lot. Cameramen stood on ladders, reporters jostled for angles, all of them broadcasting the same shocking headline: Disabled children found dead in Louisiana swamp. National networks cut into regular programming, with breaking news banners splashing across screens. The FBI had officially taken over jurisdiction of the case. Inside the park's main visitor center, a hastily assembled command post buzzed with agents, technicians, and law enforcement personnel. A large map of the park was spread across a wall, covered in pushpins and note cards. At a makeshift podium outside, Special Agent Michelle Daniels addressed a growing sea of reporters. Stern and focused, with close-cropped dark hair and a perpetually furrowed brow, she commanded attention as she delivered her statement. At approximately 5:42 this morning, search teams recovered the remains of 2 individuals linked to the disappearance of students from New Horizons Academy. One victim has been preliminarily identified as Mia Sanchez, age 10, and the other as 35-year-old Emma Hall, a teacher at the school. Due to the ongoing investigation, we are not releasing details regarding cause of death or condition of remains at this time. A flurry of questions erupted, reporters calling out over one another. Is this being investigated as a terror incident? Were there any ransom notes? Do you believe the other children are alive? Agent Daniels raised a hand to quiet them. We are pursuing multiple leads and utilizing every available resource to locate the remaining children and staff. We urge anyone with information, no matter how insignificant it may seem, to contact the FBI's dedicated tip line immediately. Before she could finish, a communications officer rushed to her side, whispering urgently in her ear and handing her a folded sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the message, and though her face remained composed, a tightness appeared around her mouth. This press conference is now concluded, she said briskly. Further updates will be provided as appropriate. Thank you. Ignoring the renewed cacophony of questions, she strode away, heading straight back into the command center. Inside, the atmosphere had shifted palpably. 8 families had gathered in a closed room, separated from the press and shielded from the outside world by agents and park staff. Julia and Thomas sat holding hands, joined by other parents equally stricken with grief and fear. Agent Daniels entered without ceremony. The room fell silent. We've received a ransom demand, she announced, her voice flat and unembellished. The air shifted as everyone gasped collectively. The demand came via email approximately 15 minutes ago, sent to the school's administration office. She held up a government-issued tablet and turned the screen toward the group. The message was stark, almost clinical. We have your children. Mia Sanchez and Emma Hall were eliminated to demonstrate our seriousness. The remaining hostages will be released upon receipt of $2 million in unmarked bills. You have 24 hours. Further instructions will follow confirmation of your agreement. Every 12 hours without compliance will result in another elimination. The wealthy families of New Horizons can afford this small price for their children's lives. Beneath the text was a single photo. The room collectively leaned in, breath held. 8 children and 1 adult were huddled together in what appeared to be a dimly lit, concrete room. They sat on the floor, close to each other. Some looked up at the camera with red-rimmed eyes. Others stared off, dazed. Julia spotted Liam immediately. His neon green hoodie had been removed, replaced by a plain gray shirt. His glasses were missing. His face was pale, streaked with dried tears, but he was alive. "Liam," she whispered, reaching instinctively toward the screen. "He's alive." "The timing of this message is strategic," Agent Daniels said. It arrived just minutes after news broke of the body recovery. The perpetrators were waiting to create maximum psychological pressure. They're calculating. Are they insane? Rebecca Lynn, mother of another student, asked, her voice sharp with disbelief. $2 million? The email includes financial appendices, Daniels continued. Detailed breakdowns of each family's wealth, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, even off-market valuations. Information not easily obtainable. This strongly suggests an inside source with access to sensitive school records. The room erupted with frantic murmurs. James Whitaker, father of twin boys in the class, shot to his feet. "Let me see the full document," he demanded. "Now." Daniels nodded, handing him the tablet. "They know everything," he said bitterly, scrolling. "My stock options, my wife's trust fund, even the art pieces in our vacation home. This is personal." They did their homework. Other parents began pulling out phones, dialing banks, wealth advisors. "We'll pay it," Rebecca said immediately. "I don't care what the FBI says. That's my child in there." "The FBI has a standing policy," Daniels interjected, raising her voice, "not to negotiate with kidnappers. Our data shows ransom payments rarely ensure safe returns. Once the money is delivered, the hostage often becomes a liability. That's a gamble with our children's lives." James shouted. "We are deploying every asset," Daniels replied calmly. "Digital forensics is tracing the origin of the email. We've deployed behavioral analysts, SWAT teams on standby for tactical extraction. We're working every angle, but we will not authorize a payment that could endanger more lives." Julia's voice cut through the rising volume. "What do we do while we wait?" "We buy time," Daniel said. "A public statement will be made denying negotiation. Standard protocol to delay their next move." "And if they kill another child in 12 hours?" Thomas asked, his voice low and strained. Daniels didn't answer. Instead, she walked out to prepare the public announcement, leaving behind a room full of parents on the brink of despair. Julia stared at the screen on the tablet again, at Liam's tear-streaked face. Her child. Alive. But for how long? Later that afternoon, exhausted and on the edge of collapse, Julia returned home alone. Thomas had insisted on staying behind at the command center in case there were updates. Their spacious Spanish-style house in Metairie, usually full of warmth and family noise, now felt cavernous and hollow. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the foyer, casting golden streaks on the marble floor, but it brought no comfort. She climbed the stairs slowly, every step heavy. In Liam's room, everything remained frozen in time. The dinosaur decals on the walls, his messy bed with a Star Wars comforter, the tower of books leaning dangerously on the nightstand. His half-finished Lego project sat undisturbed on the floor, frozen mid-action, as if he might walk back in and finish it any minute. Julia moved to the dresser and opened the drawer where they kept his medication, anti-seizure pills, carefully sorted into a weekly container. She grabbed all the bottles. If they really had him, and if he was really alive like in the photo, they wouldn't know what to do if he had a seizure. They wouldn't know how to help him. The thought made her stomach turn. Suddenly, her phone rang. She stared at the screen. Unknown caller. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Then she answered. Hello. Is this Julia Thompson, mother of Liam? The voice on the other end was distorted, digitally altered. Neither male nor female. Mechanical and chilling. Yes, she whispered, instinctively reaching for the FBI-issued recording device sitting on the dresser. She flicked it on silently. Who is this? That doesn't matter, the voice said flatly. What matters is your son needs his medication. He's missed 2 doses already. Julia's knees buckled, and she sat heavily on Liam's bed. They knew about his medication schedule. They had him. Since your FBI has declined our collective request, the voice continued, we're offering individual arrangements. $500,000 in cash. For your son. Just your son. The others don't matter. I need to talk to him, Julia said, her voice trembling. I need proof. You'll get it, the voice replied. Check your texts in 2 minutes. Meanwhile, listen closely. If you tell the police or FBI, your son dies. This offer expires in 3 hours. After that, we move on to another parent who values their child more. The line went dead. Julia sat there, shaking, barely able to move. Her phone buzzed. A text. She grabbed it and opened the image. It was Liam alive, holding that day's Times-Picayune newspaper. His face was pale, tear-streaked. His glasses were missing, and he wore a gray t-shirt instead of his hoodie. A digital timestamp in the corner showed the photo had been taken less than 30 minutes ago. Another message followed, coordinates and instructions. A warehouse in the port of New Orleans. 1 hour. No police. Come alone. Julia stared at the screen, then at the envelope where she kept some emergency cash. Barely a few $1,000s. Not enough. Not even close. She bolted down to the master bedroom and opened the safe behind Thomas's framed degrees. Inside, their passports, birth certificates, some cash, about $3,000, and jewelry. She dumped the cash into her purse. Then, from her vanity, her diamond engagement ring, a pair of emerald earrings from her birthday, her mother's Tiffany bracelet, and the Rolex she'd bought for Thomas last year. All of it. Next, she opened Thomas's nightstand and retrieved the Glock 19 he insisted they learn to use when they bought the house. She checked the magazine. Fully loaded. Her fingers trembled as she placed it into her purse. Then she scribbled a note, following a lead. Neighbor may have seen something. We'll call soon. Love you. It wasn't much, but she didn't want Thomas or the FBI to know. They'd stop her, and she couldn't let them. At the bank, she requested an emergency withdrawal. The branch manager, who recognized her, was immediately concerned. Mrs. Thompson, is everything all right? Family emergency, she replied hoarsely. I need cash. Now. You have the balance, of course, he said gently, but we can only give you $70,000 today, without advance notice. That's our internal cap. Then give me that, she said quickly. Everything you can. 20 minutes later, she left the bank with a manila envelope full of bills, nowhere near the $500,000 demanded. As she reached her car, her phone buzzed again. New message. Warehouse 14. Loading dock entrance. 1 hour. No police. Or he dies. The port of New Orleans was about 30 minutes away. Her hands shook as she drove, checking her mirrors constantly. Her thoughts raced. Was this a trap? Were they watching her? If she gave them the money, would they actually let Liam go? Would they kill him anyway? Still, she pressed on. The warehouse district had long since passed its prime. Many buildings were abandoned, their windows shattered or boarded. She found Warehouse 14. its loading dock door raised about 3 feet from the ground. She parked behind the building and clutched her purse tight. Then she crouched and ducked under the door. The warehouse interior was cavernous and dark. Sunlight filtered through broken windows in dusty shafts. The air smelled of mold and chemicals. "Hello," she called out, voice echoing. "I'm here about my son." "Stop," a voice called from the shadows. "Mail. Put the bag down. Step back 6 feet." She obeyed. 2 men emerged from the darkness. Both wore ski masks. One was tall, muscular, with a scar visible on his neck. The other, shorter, thinner, held a gun aimed directly at her. "Where's he?" she asked, voice trembling. The short one ignored her, kneeling to examine the contents of her purse. He counted the cash, then pulled out the jewelry. "This isn't 500 grand, he sneered. "Maybe 250. You wasting our time." "It's everything I could get," Julia said quickly. "Please, just let me see him." The tall man nodded to someone in the back. A third figure appeared, wheeling out a large adult wheelchair. Liam, bound at the wrists, tape over his mouth. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Liam," Julia cried, taking a step forward. The gun raised instantly. "No," the tall man said. "You don't give us what we want, we don't give you the kid." "Please," she begged. "He needs his medication. It's in the bag." The 3 men spoke in hushed tones. Then the tall one approached. "We have a problem," he said coldly. "You've seen too much. We were going to release the boy. But now, we need leverage. You're coming too." Julia's breath caught. "Take me instead," she said quickly. "Let Liam go. He has seizures." "No," the man said. "We move you both. To the harbor." That word echoed in Julia's mind. The harbor, where the others were. "Let me give him his meds," she tried again. Instead of answering, the man raised his gun and struck her hard across the temple. Pain exploded. Blood ran down her face. Her vision swam. Liam screamed against the tape. "Either you walk," the man said, "or we drag you unconscious." Julia wiped the blood from her eye. "I'll walk," she said, her voice hard. "Just don't hurt him." As they turned toward the van parked outside the rear of the warehouse, a distant sound broke the silence. Sirens. Helicopters. Police. The kidnappers panicked. The tall man turned to her, furious. "You led them here?" "No," she whispered. "I swear I didn't." But it was too late. The moment the sirens became unmistakable, the warehouse erupted into chaos. The scarred leader cursed loudly, spinning toward Julia with his weapon raised. "You brought them, you lying." "No." Julia screamed, holding up her hands. "I didn't tell anyone. I came alone." But her protests were drowned out by the growing cacophony outside. Helicopter rotors thumped overhead, their shadows racing across the boarded-up windows. Red and blue lights flickered through the cracks in the warehouse walls. Tactical vehicles skidded to a stop beyond the perimeter, and armored agents spilled out like a tidal wave. The shorter kidnapper rushed to one of the windows and cursed. "They've surrounded the whole block. How the hell did they find us?" "Doesn't matter," the scarred man snapped. "Take the back exit. Dump the evidence. We move to the harbor now." Julia's heart was pounding, so loud it drowned out the shouting. She looked at Liam, still restrained in the wheelchair, his wide eyes fixed on her. In that split second of panic and instinct, she lunged toward him. The scarred man swung around and fired. The shot missed by inches, smashing into a rusted steel pillar, sending sparks and fragments into the air. Julia kept moving. She reached Liam, dropped to her knees, and began clawing at the zip ties. "Run," she whispered as she yanked one hand free, tearing off the duct tape from his mouth. "Run and hide." The steel back door of the warehouse blew open, a battering ram slamming it inward as two FBI agents stormed through. Flashbangs were hurled in every direction. A blinding explosion of white light and sound disoriented everyone. Julia grabbed Liam and dragged him behind a stack of wooden crates, shielding him with her body. The scarred leader roared in anger and opened fire blindly. "We've got civilians," a tactical officer shouted. "Hold fire, I repeat. Hold fire near the southeast quadrant." Julia huddled against the crates, her back burning with pain. She tried to block out everything: the gunshots, the shouting, the crashing of boots. Liam sobbed silently into her shoulder as she whispered, "Stay down. Don't move. I've got you." From her position, she saw the scarred leader stumbling backward. He took 2 rounds to the chest from an agent at the entrance, but he didn't drop. He fired again, this time hitting one of the officers, who crumpled to the ground. "Medic," someone screamed. "Officer down." Another volley of bullets struck the scarred man squarely in the torso. He staggered, then collapsed with a sickening thud just a few feet from Julia and Liam. His mask was torn, revealing a face twisted in fury and disbelief as the life drained from his eyes. The shorter kidnapper threw down his weapon and raised his hands. The third suspect, who had wheeled Liam earlier, bolted toward the back exit, but was tackled by agents bursting through a side passage. The warehouse was a whirlwind of noise and light. Julia tried to lift herself, but couldn't. Pain radiated down her side. She touched her back and felt something warm and sticky: blood. Her vision blurred. "Liam," she croaked. "Stay down, Mom." Liam's voice cracked with panic. "Mom, stay awake." "Daddy," he screamed toward the flashing lights. "Help. We're over here. Mom's hurt." Seconds later, Thomas's voice broke through the chaos. "Julia." "Liam." He appeared from behind a tactical agent, his face ghostly pale. He ran toward them, falling to his knees beside Julia. "She's bleeding," he shouted. "Help. Get a medic." Agents moved in, securing the area. Paramedics rushed over with a stretcher and equipment. One of them assessed Julia quickly. Gunshot wound to the upper shoulder. Through and through. Heavy bleeding, but stable vitals. "We need to move now." "His meds," Julia whispered. "They're in my purse." "He needs them." "We've got them," a paramedic assured her, retrieving the bag from the floor. "We'll make sure he gets his dose immediately." Thomas cradled Liam with one arm and held Julia's hand with the other as paramedics worked efficiently to stabilize her. Julia's eyelids fluttered. "He's alive," she murmured. "The others, they said the harbor." "I know," Thomas said quickly. "I told them. They're already moving. Just hold on." Julia was loaded onto the stretcher. As the medics carried her out, she caught one last glimpse of Liam's terrified face, his small hand holding tightly onto his father's sleeve. In the ambulance, a paramedic continued monitoring her vitals, while an FBI agent leaned close. "Mrs. Thompson, I know this is hard, but anything you remember, anything about where they said the other children were?" Julia nodded weakly. "They said moving to the harbor. Another warehouse." Somewhere isolated, the agent relayed the message through his radio. "All units. Subject confirms possible secondary location near Port of New Orleans. Search teams redirecting immediately. Prepare breach teams." Julia heard the confirmation. Then everything went black. She was rushed into the ER at Tulane Medical Center. A trauma team was already prepped. As she drifted into unconsciousness, her only thought was of Liam and the other children still out there. She had to wake up. She had to help them. 2 hours later, Julia opened her eyes slowly, disoriented by the soft beeping of machines. The room was clean, brightly lit. She turned her head slightly and saw Thomas sitting beside her, gripping her hand. "You're okay," he whispered, eyes filled with tears. You're going to be okay. Liam was sitting in a wheelchair beside the bed, holding a juice box, his face pale but alert. He looked at her and immediately burst into tears. Julia reached out, her hand trembling, and he buried his face into her shoulder, careful of the bandages. "How is he?" she asked weakly. "They gave him his meds right away," Thomas said. "No seizure. Just shaken." A pediatrician looked at him, no injuries. But a psychologist will work with him. For the trauma. Julia exhaled. Relief mingled with heartbreak. The others. "We don't know yet," Thomas said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "One of the kidnappers is talking. They're negotiating a deal for information. The FBI raided 2 more buildings already." Just then, the door opened and Detective Rivera entered, her face tense but hopeful. "We acted on your intel," she said. "Our teams raided 3 warehouses along the harbor. One of them had a hidden bunker in the back. We found them." Julia's breath caught. Alive. All 8 children. And Ms. Ramirez. Malnourished. Dehydrated. But alive. They're being transported to different hospitals, now based on individual needs. Julia started crying silently. Rivera continued, her expression hardening. "The most disturbing part? One of the suspects we arrested at that site was Ms. Ramirez's colleague, Ms. Torres. She wasn't a victim. She was helping them." Julia froze. "What?" "She had severe gambling debts. The others said she gave them inside access, family finances, student files. She planned the whole thing, picked the field trip, picked the driver. She knew exactly what she was doing." "And Mr. Grant?" Thomas asked. "Innocent," Rivera confirmed. "They deliberately excluded him. He had no idea." Julia closed her eyes and pulled Liam close. The nightmare wasn't over, but the worst was behind them. Detective Rivera remained by Julia's hospital bedside as she delivered the final, shocking revelations. "Ms. Torres has already admitted her role," Rivera said, her voice heavy with disgust. "She claims the plan wasn't supposed to involve killing anyone, just abductions, ransom, fast money to pay off her debts. But once they had the children, things spiraled out of her control. She wasn't prepared for what her partners would do, or so she says." Julia stared at her in disbelief, the painkillers dulling her physical pain, but doing little to numb the horror of what she was hearing. "She knew all our children," Julia said. "She taught them. She looked us in the eye. How does someone do that?" Rivera looked away for a moment, her jaw tightening. "We'll be launching a full investigation into the school's hiring and vetting processes. She'd racked up nearly $200,000 in gambling debts over the past year. She made contact with the wrong people. They saw opportunity, and she gave them the blueprint." Julia closed her eyes, trying to absorb the enormity of the betrayal. Beside her, Liam remained quiet, his little body tucked into the corner of the hospital bed, leaning against her gently. His hand still held hers, his grip steady despite the trauma etched across his small face. "What happens now?" Thomas asked, his voice low. "We're coordinating with federal prosecutors," Rivera replied. "There will be charges for kidnapping, conspiracy, child endangerment, and murder. At least 7 people have been arrested so far. 3 of them, Ms. Torres included, were inside that final warehouse. Another 2 were tracked down via digital surveillance and intercepted while attempting to flee the state." "And the others?" Julia asked. "Those who didn't make it?" Rivera's expression darkened. "Mia Sanchez's family has been notified. Ms. Hall's, too. The medical examiner has completed their preliminary reports. Execution-style gunshots. It was meant to send a message, a warning to the rest of you. And it worked." Silence settled over the room, heavy and suffocating. Then Liam spoke for the first time in hours, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "Why did they take us, Mommy?" Julia turned to him, stroking his hair gently. "Because they were bad people, sweetheart. But they're not going to hurt you anymore." "They made us stay in the dark," Liam said. "I couldn't sleep. I missed you." Julia's eyes welled with tears. "I missed you too. Every second." Rivera cleared her throat gently. "We're assigning trauma specialists to each of the children. The next phase is all about recovery, physically and emotionally." "What about the school?" Thomas asked. "It's closed for now. Under federal investigation," Rivera replied. "There are layers to this: financial records, security policies, personnel files. A lot of people failed to ask the right questions or ignored the signs." "I want to talk to the parents," Julia said suddenly. "All of them. We need to speak with one voice. For the ones who are home and the ones who aren't." Rivera nodded. "You're not the only one thinking that. Some of the families are already organizing. There's talk of filing a civil suit and pushing for national legislation on school security and background checks for special needs programs." "Good," Julia said firmly. "If we don't act, then what was the point of all this?" The door opened quietly, and a nurse stepped in with a clipboard. "Sorry to interrupt," she said softly. "Just need to check vitals and give the next dose of pain meds." Rivera took the cue to leave. "I'll check in again later." "And Julia, thank you. If you hadn't taken that risk, we might still be searching." Julia gave a faint nod, but her thoughts were elsewhere. As the nurse moved around her, checking machines and adjusting for lines, Julia stared at the ceiling. So much had changed in just a few days. She didn't feel like the same person who had walked Liam to the bus on Thursday morning. That woman had been tired, rushed, thinking about errands and work deadlines. That woman hadn't known true terror yet. But now she did. Later that evening, as the sedatives began to wear off and Julia regained more clarity, the door opened again. This time it was Agent Daniels. She wore the same crisp suit as before, but now her face showed a crack in the professional armor. She sat in the chair beside the bed and didn't speak for a moment. Then she said, "We traced the phone that called you, the one that made the private ransom offer. It was a burner. No fingerprints. No GPS trace. But we think we know who placed the call." Julia raised her eyebrows. "One of the suspects we arrested at the second warehouse confessed to using the child's medical records. Said it was his job to find out vulnerabilities. That's how they knew about Liam's seizures." "How did you find us?" Thomas asked. "The bank," Daniels replied. "They flagged the large cash withdrawal. Routine protocol for suspicious activity. When we couldn't reach you, we pinged your location from your phone. By the time we realized what was happening, you were already at the warehouse. We mobilized immediately." "So I didn't lead them there," Julia said, looking at Thomas. "They found me." "Yes," Daniel said. "And thank God we did." "Will they all go to prison?" Liam asked quietly, his voice trembling. Daniels softened her tone. "Yes. They're not going to hurt anyone else. And you helped to stop them." Liam didn't respond. He just rested his head against Julia's arm again. "We'll be issuing formal statements," Daniels continued. "The media already knows most of the story. We've done our best to protect the children's identities. But there will be questions. Cameras. You should prepare for that." "I don't care about cameras," Julia said. "I care that he's alive." Daniels nodded. "We'll be in touch soon." She stood and exited as quietly as she came. The room was silent once more. The only sounds were the rhythmic beeps from the monitor and the soft hum of the Ford pump. Julia closed her eyes, her fingers still tangled with Liam's. There were no more kidnappers hiding in shadows. No more unanswered phones. No more empty school buses. But the grief would linger. The guilt would fester. And the healing would take time. 3 days after the rescue, Julia sat on a folding chair in a small auditorium inside the federal building in downtown New Orleans. Around her were the other families, some still bandaged, others pale and haggard with exhaustion. The air buzzed with the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead, a stark contrast to the emotional weight pressing on everyone present. Liam sat beside her, his hand still clutching hers tightly. He hadn't spoken much since they left the hospital, but he refused to be out of her sight, and she didn't force him. On the far side of the room, David and Elizabeth Sanchez sat in silence, their expressions hollow. A framed photo of Mia sat on the table in front of them, flanked by a bouquet of purple lilies. The pain in their eyes was unbearable to witness, and Julia had no idea how to approach them. She wanted to say something, anything, but no words would ever be enough. Special Agent Daniels stepped up to the front of the room. The clatter of shifting chairs quieted as everyone turned to face her. "First of all," Daniels began, "I want to extend my deepest condolences to the Sanchez family and the Hall family. We owe you more than words can ever repay." Elizabeth nodded stiffly, a tissue clutched in her hand. David said nothing, his gaze locked forward. "We are here today to answer your questions," Daniels continued, "to explain what happened, what we've done, and what comes next. You deserve transparency and justice." She gestured toward a projector screen behind her. It flickered to life, displaying an organizational chart with photographs, names, and timelines. The core group responsible for the abduction consisted of 7 individuals. 3 were on site during the field trip. 2 provided logistical support. 1 coordinated communications. And the 7th, Ms. Torres, was the insider who gave them access to all the sensitive information they needed. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room as Daniels went on. They selected New Horizons Academy because of its exclusivity. The children's disabilities made them more vulnerable. The wealth of the families made them high-value targets. And the school's tight-knit structure made surveillance easier. "So we were targeted because we cared," Thomas muttered bitterly under his breath. "Because we gave our kids the best we could." Julia squeezed Liam's hand tighter. "We have recovered most of the ransom planning materials," Daniels continued. "Emails, phone records, wire transfers. Ms. Torres was in charge of the financial dossiers. She knew who had offshore accounts, who had multiple homes. She knew about medication needs, psychological profiles, even which children had the most vocal parents. And that's how they chose Mia," Elizabeth said suddenly, her voice raw. "Because we were quiet. Because we didn't post photos. We didn't show up to every meeting." Daniels paused. They rotated victims based on perceived leverage. Mia's death was a calculated act meant to provoke compliance. The same goes for Ms. Hall. Julia could barely stay seated. Every word dug deeper into her chest. "What happens to them now?" she asked. "All 7 have been charged with multiple counts of first-degree murder, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and federal extortion," Daniels replied. "Federal prosecutors are preparing for trial. We expect life sentences for the majority, possibly capital charges for at least 2. James Whitaker raised his hand, his jaw clenched. Why wasn't the school shut down before this happened? How did Torres pass a background check? Daniels hesitated. That's a question for state authorities and the school board. But we're pushing for a federal review of hiring practices at all private institutions that serve vulnerable populations. You'll have an opportunity to testify before Congress if you choose. I want to, Julia said quietly. I think we all should. Several heads nodded in agreement. The screen changed again, now showing photos of the children after their rescue, blurred for privacy, but still recognizable to their parents. Bandaged arms, hollow cheeks, trembling hands. These children endured unimaginable fear, Daniel said. They were deprived of medication, light, fresh air. They were isolated, but they survived, thanks to your cooperation, your bravery, and your refusal to give up. The meeting ended with a moment of silence. Julia held Liam close as she stood. All around her, parents embraced, whispered, cried quietly. No one knew how to begin healing, but being together helped. Later that evening, back at home, Julia walked through the front door with Liam at her side. The house felt foreign now, too clean, too quiet. Liam wandered into his bedroom and stood staring at the mess he'd left behind that morning of the trip. His books, his drawings, the Lego tower he never finished. He reached for it slowly and sat down on the floor, starting to rebuild it without a word. Julia stood in the doorway, tears sliding down her cheeks. She didn't interrupt. She didn't speak. She just watched her son reclaim something that had nearly been taken from him forever. Thomas came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "He's doing better than I am," he whispered. Julia leaned into him. "He's coping the only way he knows how. And maybe that's enough for now." Later that night, Julia couldn't sleep. She sat at the kitchen table, staring at her laptop. The cursor blinked at the top of a blank document. Slowly, she began typing. "My name is Julia Thompson. My son Liam was abducted along with 9 other children on a field trip. I am writing this so the world remembers. So no parent ever has to feel what I felt. So no child ever has to scream into the dark, wondering why their mother didn't come." She paused, then continued. The words poured out, every detail, every fear, every scream. Her hands trembled, but she didn't stop. This wasn't just therapy. It was testimony. It was a record, a reckoning. By the time the sun rose, she had written over 10,000 words. A beginning. The first step toward something bigger. Toward remembrance. Toward change. Over the next week, Julia's story, along with the others, spread across the country like wildfire. Local news stations picked up the story first, then regional outlets, then national primetime shows. Her open letter, the one she had begun writing in the dead of night at her kitchen table, was published by a major newspaper under the headline, "A Mother's Nightmare: What They Took from Our Children." The article was raw, honest, and unflinching. Within hours, it went viral. Thousands of comments poured in, parents sharing their own fears, teachers expressing outrage, lawmakers promising change. The photograph of Liam in his gray t-shirt holding the newspaper became a symbol, plastered across headlines, social media feeds, and talk show segments. Julia didn't want fame. She didn't want attention. But she knew the story couldn't fade into silence. So when the first interview request came, she accepted. The segment aired on a Sunday night news program. She sat beneath soft studio lighting, hands folded in her lap, Liam beside her, quieter but resolute. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist with years of trauma reporting experience, asked the questions gently. "What was going through your mind when you walked into that warehouse?" "I was terrified," Julia answered. "But I didn't care. I just wanted my son back. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about whether they'd kill me. I only thought he needs his meds. He needs his mom. And when you saw him, I wanted to cry. But I didn't. I couldn't afford to. I had to be strong for him. For the others, still missing." Liam looked at her, eyes wide, and squeezed her hand. "She saved me," he said simply, and the camera cut to Julia blinking back tears. The interview drew millions of viewers. The next morning, lawmakers in 3 states announced new bills aimed at regulating private special education institutions, requiring stricter background checks, mandatory panic alert systems, and direct FBI access to field trip itineraries. A senator from California called Julia personally and invited her to testify at a congressional hearing on school safety reforms. "We need voices like yours," he said. "Voices that can't be ignored." Julia agreed. Not for herself, for Mia, for Ms. Hall, for every child who never made it home from a place that was supposed to protect them. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the case continued to evolve. Prosecutors announced that 3 of the suspects, including Ms. Torres, had entered plea agreements in exchange for full cooperation. Details of their confessions began to emerge. They revealed how the group had scouted the park weeks in advance, bribed a park employee to disable cameras near the bus route, and used a second vehicle hidden in the mangroves to transport the children away. They confirmed that Ms. Torres had disabled the GPS tracker on the bus and swapped the SIM cards of the teachers' phones to prevent tracing. The brutality of their planning stunned even the most seasoned agents. What chilled Julia most was a single detail buried in the report. The children were sorted into low-risk and high-value groups. Those deemed low risk were to be released or eliminated quickly. Mia had been labeled low risk. That night, Julia couldn't sleep. She sat at the edge of Liam's bed and watched him sleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm, his face peaceful for the first time in days. She thought of Elizabeth Sanchez, of how grief had hollowed her eyes and dried her voice. The next morning, Julia drove to Elizabeth's house. She hadn't visited since the news broke. She brought flowers, unsure if it was too much or not enough. Elizabeth answered the door, her face gaunt, her hair pulled back into a tight, unwashed bun. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Julia said softly, "I'm sorry. I should have come sooner." Elizabeth shook her head. "There's no good time for this kind of pain." Julia stepped forward and hugged her. They stood there for a long time, 2 mothers bound by trauma, grief, and something that didn't yet have a name. They sat in the living room. David joined them, quieter than before, his hands trembling as he poured coffee. Julia placed the flowers on the mantel beneath Mia's photograph. "She loved butterflies," Elizabeth said. "I always thought she'd become a vet. She had this way with animals. Even the mean dogs liked her." "Liam still talks about her," Julia said. "He misses her. He drew her a picture. Said it was for her to find in heaven." Tears rolled down Elizabeth's cheeks. "They were all so small," she said, "and the world was so cruel." Julia nodded, eyes burning. "But we can fight back. For her. For the others." They sat together for another hour, not always speaking, sometimes just sharing the silence. It was the most healing Julia had felt since the nightmare began. When she left, she promised to return. And she did. Weekly. They started calling it Mia Mondays. Small gatherings where parents shared stories, vented frustrations, and slowly began to rebuild trust in the world around them. Outside those meetings, Julia worked tirelessly with advocacy groups. She met with education leaders, testified at state and federal hearings, and even co-wrote a policy paper on resilience frameworks for schools with at-risk students. Through it all, Liam remained her anchor. He struggled with nightmares, sudden noises, crowded spaces. But he clung to routines. Reading time, Lego builds, hot chocolate after dinner. His way of reminding the world, "I'm still here." One afternoon, Julia received a call from the district attorney. "We're finalizing the charges," he said. "Would you like to give a statement to be read at sentencing?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. She wrote it that night. It began simply, "To those who took my son, you failed. You thought you could break us. but we are still standing. And you will never steal another child again." On sentencing day, Julia stood in court, face to face with the woman who had once taught Liam phonics and supervised his art projects. Ms. Torres looked older, thinner. No remorse showed in her eyes. Julia read her statement anyway. Every word a blade, every pause a promise. The courtroom was silent when she finished. And when the judge read the sentence, life without parole, there were no cheers. Only the sound of justice breathing quietly in a room that had known too much pain. It had been 3 months since the sentencing, but Julia still found herself startled by certain sounds: a car backfiring, the buzz of an old intercom, even the low thump of a closing door. Trauma, she had come to realize, wasn't something you escaped. It was something you learned to live alongside, like a shadow that didn't always follow the light. Liam had returned to therapy full-time. Twice a week he met with Dr. Molina, a soft-spoken child psychologist who specialized in trauma recovery for children with developmental differences. Julia sat in the waiting room during every session, fingers curled around a paperback book she never really read. Sometimes Thomas joined her. Other times, he worked remotely from the car, always within reach if needed. New Horizons Academy had reopened under an entirely new administration. The board had resigned en masse, and a federal monitor had been appointed. Julia was invited to join the advisory committee. She hesitated at first, not wanting to be a symbol, but eventually agreed. "If we're going to rebuild," she told the director, "we're going to do it right." The first order of business was designing the new field trip protocols. Each bus now equipped with dual GPS tracking systems, live-stream dash cams, and a staff panic button linked directly to law enforcement. Julia insisted on another addition: a parent liaison on every trip. No exceptions. The school also partnered with local advocacy groups to offer trauma-informed education for teachers and aides. Every member of the faculty underwent retraining. Every classroom was redesigned with sensory calming elements and emergency lockdown procedures. It wasn't just about security, it was about control, about giving the children a sense of safety in a world that had once betrayed them. Outside the school, Julia and Thomas launched a foundation, the Liam Strong Initiative, dedicated to child safety reform. Its mission was threefold: legislative advocacy, direct support for families of trauma victims, and public awareness campaigns. The Foundation's first video, a short documentary narrated by Julia and featuring drawings made by Liam, debuted online with little fanfare. But within 48 hours, it had been viewed over 3 million times. It began with a single line spoken by Liam himself: "They took us, but they didn't keep us." The most profound moments, Julia found, happened not in hearings or headlines, but in everyday silence. In the way Liam would now double-check the locks before bed and then ask softly, "We're safe, right?" Or in the way he carried an old photo of Mia in his backpack and said, "She still comes with me." Julia never corrected him. Grief had its own language, and Liam's version was just as valid as any eulogy. The other families remained close: the Jacobsons, the Lynns, the Whitakers. Every second Friday, they rotated hosting a dinner. No media, no speeches, just food and laughter and moments where the world felt ordinary again. "It's like post-war," Thomas once said. "We're survivors. We have to remind each other how to live." Julia agreed. But there were still days she awoke gasping, dreams dragging her back into that warehouse, the gunshot ringing out, Liam's scream echoing in her skull. On those days, she wrote. She filled journal after journal, sometimes letters to herself, sometimes to Mia, sometimes to the version of Julia who had once waved cheerfully as a bus pulled away, never knowing the abyss that waited on the other side. Then, one morning, She opened her email and saw a message that made her hands tremble. It was from a film producer based in Atlanta. He had read her op-ed, seen the documentary, and wanted to speak. "This isn't about exploitation," he assured her during their first call. "It's about remembrance, truth, and healing." Julia wasn't sure how to feel. She wasn't interested in fame, but she knew that storytelling had power. If their story could reach more people, could move them, change things, maybe it was worth it. She met with him, with legal counsel, and with a trauma consultant to ensure sensitivity. She insisted on full creative oversight. No composite characters. No glamorizing the terror. "The story must stay real," she said. Because the pain was real. As the project developed, so did Liam. He began drawing again, dinosaurs, yes, but also scenes of his rescue. Helicopters. Bad guys with red X's. And always in the corner, a small figure labeled Mom, holding his hand. One day, Dr. Molina asked Liam if he still had nightmares. Liam shrugged. "Sometimes. But now I talk to them. I say, you don't win." Julia sat outside the door, her hand covering her mouth to keep from sobbing. In late spring, New Horizons hosted its first community day since reopening. Families, neighbors, first responders, and former staff gathered on the playground. Julia stood at the podium, looking out over the smiling faces. Behind her was a new mural the children had painted with guidance from an art therapist. It showed a massive oak tree with handprints as leaves and a rainbow stretching behind it. In the bottom corner, in bold red letters, "We are still here." She took a deep breath. 3 months ago, I didn't think this day would ever come. I thought the darkness would never lift. But you all proved me wrong. This community is resilient. These children are brave. And today is for them. Applause rose like a tide, and Julia stepped back, blinking in the sunlight. Liam ran up to her afterward and threw his arms around her. "You did good, Mom," he said. "You too," she whispered, kissing his hair. That night, as they drove home, Liam looked out the window and asked, "Do you think they're still out there? The ones who didn't get caught?" Julia paused. "I don't know. But if they are," she looked at him in the rearview mirror, "they should know this. We're not afraid anymore." 1 year to the day after the disappearance, the Thompsons returned to Jean Lafitte National Historical Park. The skies were clear, the bayou waters calm, dragonflies flitting lazily across the surface as the morning sun cast a golden glow through the cypress trees. It was the same trail, the same route that the school bus had taken before it vanished. But today, the scene felt different, not haunted, but reclaimed. New Horizons Academy had organized a memorial and healing ceremony, inviting the families, first responders, park staff, and community members who had played a role in the children's rescue. Not everyone came. For some, the memories were still too raw, too tangled in grief to be faced again. But Julia had known they needed to return. She had asked Liam if he wanted to come, and he had surprised her with a quiet but resolute yes. The ceremony was small, informal. No cameras, no press, no speeches from officials. Just voices of remembrance, music from a student violinist, and the soft sound of leaves rustling in the wind. A plaque had been installed near the trailhead, embedded into a low stone wall. Julia traced the engraved names with her fingers. Mia Sanchez, age 10. Emma Hall, age 35. 2 names carved forever into history. Below them, in smaller print, the words, "We remember. We rebuild. We rise." Thomas stood beside her, one arm around her back. Liam sat cross-legged nearby, holding a sketchbook in his lap. He had drawn a picture of the tree mural from school, but this time he added a butterfly, purple, just like the one Mia used to wear in her hair. As the ceremony concluded, a ranger approached Julia with a tentative smile. "I'm really glad you came," he said. "I was on the first team to respond that day. I remember the silence, the emptiness. I never thought I'd see a day like this." Julia nodded. "Neither did I." They walked together for a short while, retracing the early part of the tour path. At one bend in the boardwalk, Julia stopped, her memory jolted by the sudden stillness. "This is where they should have turned back," she said softly, "where the driver went off route." The ranger nodded. "We found tire marks weeks later, covered under reeds. Whoever planned this, they thought of everything." "Almost everything," Julia murmured. "They didn't think we'd fight back." That night, back at home, Julia tucked Liam into bed. He was taller now, a little older in his eyes, more careful with his words. He still checked under the bed and made sure the hallway light was on. But he didn't ask her to stay until he fell asleep anymore. "Good night, Mommy," he said, rolling onto his side. "I love you." "I love you too," she said, leaning down to kiss his forehead. Then she went to her bedroom, where the box sat waiting on the desk. A year's worth of notes, clippings, letters, court documents, therapy reports, and drawings. She had collected everything, archived it. She had planned to lock it away, but something told her not to. Instead, she opened her laptop and began typing again. Not testimony this time, not advocacy or grief processing. A story, a book, one that began with an orange hoodie and a crooked smile, with a mother waving goodbye and the world falling apart hours later. She called it the day the bus disappeared. But it wasn't just about what was lost. It was about what survived. As the cursor blinked at the end of the first chapter, she looked out the window. The neighborhood was quiet. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once. And then stillness. In the quiet, she allowed herself to breathe, truly breathe, because they had survived. Because healing wasn't about erasing what had happened, but about choosing, each day, to keep going despite it. Julia knew that pain had changed her, reshaped her. But it had also revealed parts of herself she didn't know existed. A ferocity, a calm resolve, a voice she had once only used for bedtime stories. Now it was a weapon, a shield, a lifeline. Across the city, other families were doing the same, rebuilding, teaching their children to trust again, to hope. Some days were harder than others, but the hard days were less frequent now, and the light, once distant, was closer than ever. 1 year ago, an entire class had vanished, and for a time, the world had forgotten how to breathe. But now they remembered. Now they rose. And now they were finally free. If this story moved you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping, true-inspired mysteries. Let us know where you're watching from. We read every single comment. And if you believe in hope and healing, drop a "God bless these families" in the comments to show your support.